The Grand Assembly Hall of Omega-7 stretched out like a monument to galactic bureaucracy, all polished metals and glowing panels that screamed, "We are very important, and you should be impressed." Seriously, the place was designed to make anyone walking in feel about 3 inches tall. Rows upon rows of elevated seating curved around a central platform where Judge Quintara sat, looking exactly like someone who had spent the last 400 years listening to people complain. Judge Quintara was a Rethkari, which meant she had 4 arms, silver skin that shimmered under the artificial lights, and the kind of face that could make you feel guilty for crimes you hadn't even committed yet. Her species had been running galactic politics for longer than most civilizations had been inventing the wheel, and boy did she know it. Today's agenda. Petition number 7412, Earth's application for membership in the Galactic Council. Again, at the center platform stood 2 humans, looking remarkably calm for people about to be roasted alive by bureaucratic condescension. Amy Kowalski, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, wore a crisp, diplomatic uniform that probably cost more than most spaceship repairs. Next to her, Brandon Torres adjusted his collar for the 3rd time, his nervous energy barely contained behind a professional smile. "Members of the esteemed Galactic Council," Amy began, her voice projecting clearly across the massive chamber, "we come before you today representing the United Earth Alliance. We believe humanity has demonstrated the technological advancement, the diplomatic capability, and the cultural maturity necessary for full membership in this august body." Admiral Vashi, a Korthin with scales that reflected light like a disco ball from hell, leaned back in his elevated seat and made a sound that could only be described as a snort. If snorts could express 17 different layers of contempt, this was that snort. "Oh, this again," Admiral Vashi muttered, loud enough for the acoustics to carry his words throughout the chamber. Several council members chuckled. "Tell me, humans, have you finally figured out faster-than-light travel that doesn't involve strapping explosives to your ships and hoping for the best?" More laughter rippled through the assembly. Brandon's jaw tightened, but Amy placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Don't take the bait," her gesture said. "Our propulsion systems have been thoroughly documented in our application materials," Brandon said evenly. "They meet all safety and efficiency standards outlined in council regulations." "Barely," coughed someone from the upper tiers. It might have been Councillor Moran, a blob-like creature whose species had mastered gravitational manipulation before Earth had discovered fire, or agriculture, or possibly even the concept of putting food in your mouth instead of just staring at it. Judge Quintara raised one of her 4 hands, bringing a temporary lull to the snickering. "Ambassador Kowalski, your species submitted a similar petition 3 years ago. It was denied. What has changed in that time to warrant this renewed application?" Amy straightened her shoulders, pulling up a holographic display from her wrist device. Images of human achievements flickered in the air above them: medical facilities, terraforming projects on Mars, diplomatic treaties with the Centauri colonies, a thriving interplanetary economy. "In the past 3 years," Amy said, "humanity has expanded our presence to 14 star systems. We have established peaceful trade relations with 8 non-council species. We have contributed humanitarian aid to the Drani's refugee crisis, providing shelter and supplies for over 2 million displaced persons. Our scientific community has made breakthrough discoveries in quantum field manipulation and biological regeneration. We have proven ourselves time and again as responsible members of the galactic community." "Responsible?" Admiral Vashi leaned forward, his scaled face twisting into what might have been a smile on a creature less reptilian. "You still wage wars among yourselves. Your planet is divided into hundreds of territorial factions, each one squabbling over resources like younglings fighting over food scraps. Half your population doesn't even believe other species exist, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary." "That is a gross oversimplification of," Brandon started, but Admiral Vashi cut him off with a wave of his clawed hand. "And let us not forget," the Admiral continued, warming to his subject like a professor who really enjoyed failing students, "your species has only been spacefaring for what, 200 years? Most council species had mastered interstellar travel before you had crawled out of your primordial oceans. You are infants, dangerous, unpredictable infants playing with technologies you barely comprehend. General Krufnog, a hulking mass of muscle and aggression from the warrior species of Thurus 9, grunted his agreement. I have reviewed your military capabilities, primitive at best. Your largest warships would be considered escort shuttles by our standards. What could you possibly offer this council beyond being a liability we would need to protect? The chamber filled with the multilingual equivalent of agreement. Clicks, whistles, subsonic rumbles, and outright laughter. Amy's face remained professionally neutral, but if you looked closely, you could see the muscles in her neck tensing. Brandon had given up on maintaining his smile altogether and had settled for expression that said, I am counting to 10 very, very slowly. Judge Quintara surveyed the room, letting the mockery run its course before raising two of her hands for silence. Does the human delegation have anything further to add before we proceed to deliberation? Amy took a breath, then another. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, measured, and absolutely done with this nonsense. With respect, Judge Quintara, we came here today to present facts, figures, and evidence of humanity's readiness to join the galactic community as equals. Instead, we have been met with ridicule, condescension, and dismissal based not on the merits of our application, but on prejudices against our species' relative youth. We ask only for fair consideration. Fair consideration? Admiral Vashi repeated, as if tasting the words and finding them sour. Very well. Let us consider fairly all those in favor of granting Earth full membership status. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Not a single hand, claw, tentacle, or appendage raised. And those opposed? The chamber erupted in a forest of raised limbs. It wasn't even close. It was a massacre dressed in parliamentary procedure. Judge Quintara's expression remained carefully neutral, but there might have been, if you were being generous, the faintest flicker of something like sympathy in her ancient eyes. The motion is denied. This council finds that humanity has not yet demonstrated the maturity and capability required for full membership. You may reapply in no fewer than 5 standard years. This session is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sound like a door slamming in your face. The official rejection hung in the air like a bad smell nobody wanted to acknowledge, but everyone could sense. Judge Quintara made a few closing remarks about maintaining diplomatic relations and encouraging continued dialogue, which was political speak for, better luck next time, children, now run along. Amy Kowalski gathered her data tablets with movements so precise they could have been choreographed. Each gesture was controlled, measured, professional, the kind of calm that came from years of diplomatic training and possibly also from imagining very creative ways to use those data tablets as weapons. Brandon Torres closed his briefcase with a soft click that somehow managed to sound like a period at the end of a very long, very frustrating sentence. They turned to leave, and that was when Admiral Drahorn decided to open his mouth. Admiral Drahorn was a Vescuri, which meant he looked like someone had taken an octopus, given it delusions of grandeur, and stuffed it into a military uniform. He sat in the upper tiers where the senior military advisors held court, and he had been relatively quiet during the proceedings. Apparently he had been saving up. Do give our regards to your little blue planet, Admiral Drahorn called out, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to particularly slow learners. Perhaps in another century or two, you'll have evolved enough to sit at the grown-up table. Until then, do try not to blow yourselves up with your own technology. It would be such a waste of paperwork for us. Laughter erupted from his section of the chamber. Not polite chuckles or restrained amusement, but full-throated, genuine laughter. The kind that said, "We find this absolutely hilarious, and we want you to know it." Several council members who had been gathering their own materials paused to join in. Councillor Marin's gelatinous form actually jiggled with mirth. A group of junior delegates from the Kellis Confederation high-fived each other, or performed whatever gesture their species used to celebrate small victories over perceived inferiors. Primitives, playing at politics, someone muttered from the crowd, not even bothering to keep their voice down. Did you see their uniforms? They still use fabric, actual woven fabric, another voice added, followed by more snickering. Amy's back stiffened, but she kept walking. Brandon's knuckles went white around the handle of his briefcase, but he kept walking, one foot in front of the other, eyes forward, maintaining dignity in the face of humiliation that would have made a lesser delegation crumble. From the observation gallery reserved for secondary diplomatic staff, Commander Tom Miley watched the whole scene unfold with the kind of stillness that came from a military career spent in situations where moving at the wrong moment got you killed. He was older than the two ambassadors, with grey streaking through his dark hair and the kind of weathered face that had seen too many battles and not enough victories. His fingers drummed once on the railing in front of him. Just once. Then stopped. Around him, the rest of the human delegation sat in various states of controlled fury. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched so tight it probably hurt. Dr. Marcus Webb had removed his glasses and was cleaning them with more force than was strictly necessary. Junior Attaché David Park had his hands folded in his lap, but his leg bounced with barely suppressed energy. "Sir?" Lieutenant Chen whispered, leaning slightly toward Commander Marley. "Permission denied," Marley said quietly, not taking his eyes off Amy and Brandon's retreating figures. "Stand down, all of you." Down in the main chamber, the celebration was picking up steam. Admiral Vashi had descended from his seat to personally congratulate Admiral Drahorn on his witty commentary. They were shaking hands or claws or whatever, clearly pleased with themselves for putting humanity in its place. Judge Quintara had already exited through her private chambers, either uncomfortable with the display or simply indifferent to it. Either way, she was gone, and without her presence the mockery grew bolder. 5 years, someone shouted. They think they can make a difference in 5 years? They will still be children in 50 years. In 100, General Kraftnog rumbled, his massive frame shaking with what might have been laughter or might have been the planet-side equivalent of contempt. Hard to tell with his species. Amy and Brandon reached the main exit doors. The massive panels slid open with a hiss that sounded almost sympathetic. They stepped through without looking back, without giving the council the satisfaction of seeing any emotion on their faces. The doors closed behind them. In the observation gallery, Commander Tom Marley finally moved. He stood slowly, buttoning his uniform jacket with deliberate precision. Around him, the rest of the human delegation rose as well, gathering their materials in silence that felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Let's go," Marley said simply. His voice was calm, flat and absolutely devoid of emotion, which was somehow more concerning than if he had been shouting. "We have a long trip home." As the human delegation filed out of the gallery, the sounds of celebration from the council chamber followed them like unwanted echoes. The message was clear, brutally clear. Earth was not welcome. Earth was not wanted. Earth was not ready. The universe was about to learn how wrong they were. The human delegation had barely made it to the docking bay when the alarms started screaming. Not the polite chimes that indicated someone had accidentally triggered a sensor, but the full-throated, gut-wrenching wail that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. Red emergency lights flooded the corridors of Omega-7, bathing everything in a color that humanity had learned long ago meant run now, ask questions later. Commander Marley's hand went instinctively to his sidearm, which of course wasn't there because the council had very strict rules about weapons in diplomatic zones. His team froze mid-step, years of training overriding panic. "What's happening?" Lieutenant Chen demanded, already pulling up her wrist console to access station systems. Before anyone could answer, the public announcement system crackled to life. Judge Quintara's voice, stripped of all diplomatic polish, cut through the chaos. "All personnel, this is not a drill. We are under Code Apex, emergency protocols. Multiple hostile vessels have engaged Sanctuary Station in Sector 47 Delta. All available security forces report." The transmission cut off, replaced by static, then by something worse. Screaming. Actual screaming coming through an open comm channel. Thousands of voices crying out in terror and pain before the audio feed mercifully died. Commander Mali and his team exchanged glances, Without a word they turned and sprinted back toward the council chambers. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, the careful order that had existed just minutes ago had dissolved into absolute pandemonium. Council members were shouting over each other in dozens of languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the volume of panicked voices. Holographic displays had erupted throughout the chamber, showing live feeds from Sanctuary Station, and the images were nightmare fuel. Sanctuary Station was, or had been, one of the jewels of neutral space. A massive orbital platform where species from across the galaxy came to trade, negotiate and coexist in peace. No weapons allowed. No military presence, symbol of what the galactic community could achieve when everyone agreed to play nice. The Krevnath Armada, currently tearing it apart, apparently had not gotten that memo. 12 warships, each one bristling with weapons that made most species' idea of overkill look like a gentle suggestion, surrounded the station like predators circling wounded prey. Energy beams sliced through the station's outer hull, venting atmosphere and people into the void. Smaller fighter craft swarmed around escape pods, picking them off with casual precision that suggested this was sport to them. How many? General Krafnog roared from his position near the main display, his warrior instincts making him the first to cut through the panic and focus on actionable information. How many souls on that station? A junior analyst, some poor kid who looked like they had been hoping for a boring day of filing reports, stammered out the numbers. Last census showed 83,412 permanent residents, sir, plus an estimated 40,000 visitors and transients. Trade conference was scheduled for this week, so numbers were higher than usual. Over 100,000 people, 100,000 civilians going about their daily lives, buying groceries, making deals, falling in love, arguing with their kids, doing all the mundane things that sentient beings did when they weren't being vaporized by warships. Where are our defense fleets? Admiral Vashi demanded, his earlier smugness replaced by something approaching actual concern. Get them there now. Quartermaster A, a thin, reedy member of the Pelian species, who looked like a strong breeze could snap them in half, worked frantically at their console. Their fingers, all 7 of them, danced across holographic controls with desperate speed. Nearest fleet is the 7th Armada under Admiral Kellis. They are 4 days away at maximum velocity. The 3rd strike group could reach the station in 3 days if they abandon their current patrol route. 3 days? Admiral Drahorn's voice went up an octave. In 3 days there will be nothing left but debris. Judge Quintara had retaken her seat, but there was nothing calm about her now. All 4 of her hands moved in agitated patterns as she tried to coordinate responses. What about local defense forces? Surely there are patrol ships in that sector. There were, Your Honor, Quartermaster replied, their voice cracking. 6 patrol cruisers responded to the initial distress call. All 6 were destroyed in the first 4 minutes of engagement. The Krevnoth are fielding dreadnought-class vessels. Our patrols never had a chance. On the main display, another section of Sanctuary Station exploded in a bloom of fire that was beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. Thousands of lives, gone in an instant. The death toll counter at the bottom of the screen ticked upward with mechanical indifference. 5,000 dead, 6,000, 7,000. The numbers climbed like a stock ticker reporting the end of the world. This is unacceptable. General Krofnog slammed his massive fist on his console, cracking the surface. We must respond. We must. With what? Admiral Vashi shot back. You heard the quartermaster. Our fleets are days away. We have nothing in range that can stand against a Krevnath war fleet. Nothing. Then, we evacuate, Councillor Moran suggested, their gelatinous form rippling with distress. Order all remaining civilians to the escape pods. Create corridors for them. The Krevnath are targeting the escape pods, someone interrupted. Look at the tactical display. They are deliberately hunting down anyone trying to flee. This is not a military strike. This is a massacre. The council chamber descended into arguing chaos. Should they try to negotiate? The Krevnoth had ignored all hailing frequencies. Should they send what few ships they had nearby anyway? That would be suicide. and would not save the station. Should they contact other regional powers, by the time anyone else arrived, this would all be over. Judge Quintara raised all four hands, trying to restore some semblance of order, but for the first time in her centuries of service, her authority felt meaningless. What good was protocol when thousands were dying every minute? What good were rules when the galaxy's most sacred neutral ground was being turned into a graveyard? Options, she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. I need options, and I need them now. Someone tell me how we save those people. Silence. Terrible, suffocating silence. Nobody had an answer. The most advanced civilizations, in the galaxy, species that had mastered faster than light travel and genetic manipulation and quantum computing, were powerless to stop this atrocity. The death toll counter continued its grim climb. 10,000, 12,000, 15,000. And somewhere in the back of the chamber, Commander Tom Marley pulled out his communication device and started typing a very specific message to a very specific location. His face remained expressionless, but his fingers moved with purpose. Time to see if Earth was really as primitive as everyone claimed. The tactical display, updated with 3 new contacts dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sector 47 Delta, small signatures, relatively speaking anyway, definitely not dreadnoughts. Identify those vessels, Admiral Vashi barked at the sensor technician, hope and desperation making his voice sharp. The technician's face fell as the data processed. They are human ships, sir. Designations read as UES Tenacity, UES Relentless, and UES Defiance. Frigate class according to their registry. They are broadcasting standard friendly identification codes. The hope that had briefly flickered in the chamber died faster than it had been born. Humans. Admiral Drawhorn actually laughed, though it sounded more like choking. 3 human frigates against 12 Krevnoth dreadnoughts. This is not help, this is 3 more ships adding themselves to the casualty list. Commander Marley's communication device chirped. Every eye in the council chamber that could physically turn in his direction did so. He raised the device to his ear, listened for exactly 4 seconds, then stepped forward toward Judge Quintara's platform. Your Honor, Marley said, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned chamber. Captain Rodriguez of the UES Tenacity is requesting permission to engage hostile forces and render assistance to Sanctuary Station. They are awaiting your authorization. For a moment, nobody spoke. The absurdity of the situation was almost comedic. Humanity, the species that had been laughed out of this very chamber less than an hour ago, was offering to fight a battle that the galaxy's greatest military powers had already written off as unwinnable. Absolutely not, General Kraftnall grumbled. This is not a matter for untested primitives playing soldier. We will not have human deaths added to this tragedy. How considerate of you to care about human deaths now, Lieutenant Chen muttered from her position near the entrance. Several council members heard her. Several chose to ignore it. Admiral Vashi shook his head, scales catching the emergency lighting. Commander Marley, with all due respect to your people's courage, 3 frigates cannot hope to accomplish what would require a full battle fleet. Tell your ships to hold position and await proper military response. Proper military response is 3 days away, Marley said flatly. Current casualty projections have the station completely destroyed in 6 hours. Your math is not adding up in favor of waiting, Admiral. On the main display, another explosion tore through Sanctuary Station's commercial district. The death toll jumped by another 1,000 in a single horrific spike. 28,000 dead now, 28,000 beings who had woken up this morning with plans and dreams and futures. Judge Quintara stared at the numbers. Her 4 hands trembled slightly. She had presided over countless sessions, negotiated treaties, settled disputes between species that had been enemies for millennia. She had seen her share of death and loss. But this was different. This was happening right now in real time while she sat in her comfortable chair and did nothing. Judge Quintara, you cannot seriously be considering, Admiral Drawhorn began. I am considering, she cut him off, her voice sharp, that we have no other options and time is running out. Commander Marley, What exactly are your ships proposing to do? Marley's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Captain Rodriguez was not specific on tactics, Your Honor, she said, and I quote, "We will handle it." That is not a battle plan, General Krafnog objected. That is suicide with confidence. The display updated again. The Krevnov had begun systematically targeting the station's life support systems. 35,000 dead, 40,000. The numbers climbed with mechanical horror. Judge Quintara closed all four of her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When they opened, something had changed in them. "Commander Marley, you have authorization. Tell your ships to engage. And may whatever gods they believe in have mercy on all of us." "Thank you, Your Honor." Marley tapped his device 3 times. "Tenacity. You are cleared hot. Show them what we do." On the tactical display, the 3 human ships accelerated toward the Krevnoth fleet with speed that made several council members actually gasp. They were not approaching cautiously or attempting to flank or using any recognizable military doctrine. They were heading straight in, full throttle, like missiles with delusions of grandeur. "They are going to ram," someone whispered in horror. "They are on a collision course." But at the last possible second, the human ships scattered in 3 different directions, with maneuvering that should have torn them apart from the G-forces alone. The lead Krevnoth dreadnought fired, but its massive plasma cannons, designed for ship-to-ship combat at medium range, were too slow to track the darting human vessels. The UES Tenacity rolled underneath the dreadnought's hull, so close that its shields scraped against the larger ship's energy barriers. As it passed, it fired not at the hull, but at the weapon emplacements themselves. Pinpoint strikes, surgical cuts. 1 gun turret exploded, then another, then a third. Not enough to destroy the dreadnought, but enough to hurt it, to make it angry, to make it focus on the tiny annoying ship that had just stung it, which was exactly when the UES Relentless hit it from behind. The Krevni had never experienced human warfare before, and it showed. Their tactics were overwhelming firepower, superior numbers, shock and awe. They were used to enemies that fought with honor, with formations, with predictable patterns. Humans did not fight with honor. Humans fought to win. The UES Defiance targeted the Krevneth fighters, and here is where things got really interesting. Instead of trying to outgun them, the human ship released dozens of small drones. Tiny things, barely bigger than a person. The Krevneth fighters ignored them, focusing on the frigate itself. Big mistake. The drones swarmed the fighters like angry wasps, attaching themselves to engines and weapon systems. Then they detonated. Not big explosions, just small-shaped charges designed to disable rather than destroy. Within seconds, half the Krevnoth fighter wing was tumbling through space, their pilots alive but their ships dead. What kind of tactic is that? Admiral Veshy breathed, watching the display with something approaching awe. Those drones are barely armed. They should be useless against military-grade shielding. They are not trying to penetrate the shields, Commander Marley explained, his voice carrying just a hint of pride. They are exploiting the fighters' own momentum to position themselves at weak points. Shield generators have to allow engine exhaust through or the ships would cook themselves. It is basic physics, combined with very good timing. The 3 human ships moved through the Krevnoth formation like sharks through a school of fish. They did not try to go head-to-head with the massive dreadnoughts. They harassed, they maneuvered, they used the enemy's own size against them. When one dreadnought fired at the Tenacity, the human ship dodged, and the shot hit another Krevnoth vessel behind it. "They are making them shoot each other," General Krafnog rumbled, leaning forward in his seat. "They are using the enemy's firepower as a weapon." Meanwhile, the UES Relentless had positioned itself near one of Sanctuary Station's damaged sections, and was somehow managing to fight off 2 Krevnoth destroyers while simultaneously deploying rescue shuttles. The shuttles darted into the broken hull, grabbing escape pods and survivors, pulling them to safety even as weapons fire lit up the space around them. It was chaos. It was insane. It was completely contrary to every established principle of space combat. It was working. One Krevnoth dreadnought, frustrated by its inability to hit the darting human ships, made the fatal mistake of pursuing too aggressively. The UES tenacity led it straight into the debris field from the destroyed patrol ships. For a massive dreadnought, navigating the twisted metal and wreckage at high speed was suicide. It tried to pull up too late. The resulting collision did not destroy the ship, but crippled it badly enough that it began listing away from the battle, trailing atmosphere and sparks. The Krevnath fleet commander, whoever they were, apparently decided this was not worth the trouble. The remaining ships began pulling back, regrouping. They had come expecting easy prey and overwhelming victory. Instead, they had found something they were not prepared for. They had found humans having a very bad day and taking it out on someone who deserved it. The Krevnath regrouping lasted exactly 47 seconds before the humans made it very clear that regrouping was not going to be an option. Captain Rodriguez, apparently deciding that conventional space combat was boring, ordered something that made the tactical officer monitoring the display actually drop their datapad. The 3 human ships stopped running. They just stopped, hanging in space like they were waiting for a bus, positioned in a perfect triangle formation around the Krevnath fleet. "What are they doing?" Counselor Moran asked, their gelatinous form pressed against the viewing screen. "Why have they ceased maneuvering? That is tactically insane." Commander Marley checked his communication device, reading something that made the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. "Captain Rodriguez says she is done being polite." The 3 human ships opened fire simultaneously, but not at the Krevnath vessels. They fired at empty space, creating a web of crisscrossing energy beams that formed a perimeter around the enemy fleet. Then the beams began to pulse in patterns, strobing lights that made absolutely no tactical sense whatsoever. Until they did. "Sensor jamming," the tactical officer reported, their voice climbing in pitch. The humans are using their weapons as improvised electronic warfare devices. The Krevnath targeting systems are being flooded with false signatures. Their sensors are reading phantom ships everywhere. And that was when things got truly ugly for the Krevnath. Unable to accurately target the real human ships, the Krevnath fleet started firing at shadows. Massive plasma bolts lanced out at targets that did not exist, wasting ammunition and energy on ghosts. Every missed shot made them more desperate, more aggressive, more likely to make mistakes. The humans capitalized on every single one. The UES Defiance came screaming out of the sensor chaos, targeting not the dreadnoughts but their support vessels. The smaller Krevnath cruisers that had been hanging back, providing tactical coordination and logistics support, suddenly found themselves under withering fire. 2 went down in quick succession, their shields overwhelmed by concentrated missile barrages that somehow bypassed their point defense systems. "How did those missiles get through?" General Krofnog demanded, his tactical mind trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Those cruisers have state-of-the-art countermeasures. The missiles are not armed," Quartermaster A reported, their 7 fingers flying across their console, or rather, most of them are not. The humans fired a mix of live ordnance and decoys. The Krevnath defense systems wasted their countermeasures on dummy missiles, leaving them vulnerable to the real ones. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Make the enemy waste resources on threats that did not exist while real threats slipped through. Make them doubt their sensors, their training, their commanders. Break their confidence piece by piece until they were no longer an organized military force, but a collection of panicked individuals, trying desperately not to die. Meanwhile, the UES relentless and tenacity had turned Sanctuary Station into a fortress. They positioned themselves at strategic points around the damaged structure, their shields extended to maximum range, creating protective barriers that the Krevnath could not easily penetrate without committing more ships than they were willing to risk. And the whole time those rescue shuttles kept flying, in and out of the burning station, pulling survivors from sections that were seconds away from total collapse, loading escape pods, even using tractor beams to grab people who had been vented into space and still had enough air in their suits to survive. "Casualty count has stabilized," Quartermaster A reported, and for the first time in this entire nightmare, their voice carried something resembling hope. "Deaths have stopped climbing. The humans have established defensive positions that are hold current survivors extracted number over 50,000 and climbing. 50,000 people who had been written off as dead, 50,000 civilians from a dozen different species, all of whom owed their lives to 3 human frigates that were not supposed to be able to accomplish anything. The Krevnath fleet commander apparently reached the same conclusion that was dawning on everyone watching. This was not worth it. Whatever prize they had hoped to claim from Sanctuary Station was not worth fighting an enemy that refused to follow any predictable pattern, that turned every conventional advantage into a disadvantage, that seemed to treat impossible odds as a personal challenge. The Krevnath ships began to withdraw, not a tactical retreat with covering fire and organized formations, but a scrambling, desperate flight. 2 more dreadnoughts collided with each other in their haste to reach jump distance, their shields sparking as they scraped past. Fighters abandoned their attack runs and fled toward their carrier ships, some of them so panicked they forgot to request docking clearance, and just crashed into the hangar bays. The humans let them go. They could have pursued, could have pressed their advantage, could have turned the retreat into a slaughter, but they didn't. The 3 ships maintained their defensive positions around Sanctuary Station, shields still raised, weapons still hot, but holding fire. The message was clear. We are not here for revenge. We are here to save lives. But if you come back, we will end you. In the council chamber, nobody spoke. The silence was different from before, though. Before it had been the silence of helplessness and despair. Now it was the silence of people who had just watched everything they thought they knew about humanity get turned upside down and shaken until their assumptions fell out like loose change. Admiral Vashi stared at the tactical display where the 3 human ships maintained their protective formation. His scales had lost some of their luster, and his face carried an expression that might have been respect or might have been the dawning realization that he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. His own words from an hour ago echoed in the chamber, replayed by someone's audio log. Your largest warships would be considered escort shuttles by our standards. What could you possibly offer this council? The answer hung on every screen, written in the lives saved and enemies routed. Apparently quite a lot. Judge Quintara slowly stood, all 4 of her hands gripping the edge of her podium. Get me a direct line to Captain Rodriguez, she said quietly. I believe we owe her a conversation. The emergency council session reconvened 2 hours later, after the immediate crisis had been contained and the human ships had finished coordinating the massive rescue operation with Sanctuary Station's surviving personnel. The Grand Assembly Hall looked different now. Same polished metals, same glowing panels, but the atmosphere had changed from self-satisfied superiority to something that tasted suspiciously like humble pie. Council members filed in quietly, without the usual posturing and social maneuvering that normally preceded sessions. Admiral Vashi looked like he had aged a decade. General Krofnok sat heavily in his seat, his massive frame somehow seeming smaller. Even Admiral Drahorn had lost his earlier swagger, entering the chamber with the demeanor of someone expecting to be yelled at and knowing he deserved it. Judge Quintara took her position at the central podium, her silver skin somehow seeming less shimmering, more worn. This emergency session is now in order. Before we proceed with formal business, I have requested the presence of Earth's diplomatic delegation. The main doors opened, and Amy Kowalski walked in with Brandon Torres at her side. They had changed out of their formal diplomatic attire and were now wearing simple civilian clothes, which somehow made their presence more powerful, rather than less. They were not here as supplicants anymore. They were not here to beg for acceptance or prove their worth. They were here because they had been asked. Commander Mali and the rest of the human team followed behind, taking positions near the main floor rather than in the observation gallery. Nobody objected. Nobody dared. Ambassador Kowalski, Mr. Torres, Judge Quintara said, and her voice carried a weight it had not held earlier. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I extend our profound gratitude for your people's intervention at Sanctuary Station. Preliminary reports indicate your ships saved over 52,000 lives. Without your assistance, the death toll would have been catastrophic beyond measure. Amy inclined her head slightly. We did what any responsible member of the galactic community would do, Your Honor. We saw people in need, and we helped. That is what civilized species do for each other, or so I have been told. The barb landed with surgical precision. Several council members flinched. Quite so, Judge Quintara said, and if there was a hint of approval in her tone, she did not bother hiding it. The council would like to formally hear from the human delegation regarding today's events, and perhaps to reconsider certain earlier decisions made in haste. In haste, Amy repeated, her tone flat. Is that what we are calling it? Brandon touched her arm gently, a silent signal. She took a breath and stepped forward to address the full chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the room, clear and sharp as broken glass. Members of the council, this morning you rejected Earth's petition for membership. You called us primitives, infants playing with technologies we barely comprehend. You mocked our ships, our culture, our very existence as a spacefaring civilization. Admiral Drahorn suggested we might blow ourselves up with our own technology, which was, I must admit, a deeply touching expression of concern. Admiral Drahorn sank lower in his seat. You dismissed us because we have only been in space for 200 years. Because our propulsion systems are not as elegant as yours. Because we still have conflicts on our homeworld. Because in your infinite wisdom and experience you determined we lacked the maturity necessary to sit at, how did you put it, the grown-up table. Amy paused, letting the words hang in the air. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the life support system sounded deafening. And then when a crisis emerged that your vast fleets and superior technology could not address, when thousands were dying and you were paralyzed by your own protocols and distances, 3 of our primitive little ships showed up and handled it. Strange how that worked out. Brandon stepped forward, pulling up a holographic display from his wrist device. Data streams filled the air above them, technical specifications and operational reports that the Council had either ignored or failed to properly analyze from the earlier petition. Let me tell you about some things you missed while you were busy laughing, Brandon said, his voice steady and professional in a way that made the rebuke even more cutting. Human adaptive combat doctrine, which you dismissed as chaotic and unpredictable, is actually the result of centuries of warfare experience and tactical evolution. We learned a long time ago that rigid formations and honor-based combat get you killed. So we adapted, we improvised, we use every advantage, no matter how unconventional. He swiped through the data, bringing up technical schematics. Our ships, which you called primitive, incorporate modular design principles that allow rapid field modifications. That sensor jamming technique Captain Rodriguez used, she invented it 3 hours ago using existing systems in ways they were not originally designed for. That is human engineering. We build tools that can be repurposed, because we learned that you cannot predict every situation you will face. More data streams appeared, showing Earth's research initiatives in medical technology, quantum computing, artificial intelligence ethics and biological sciences. You mentioned our divisions, our conflicts, our disagreements. Yes, we argue. Yes, we have different factions and viewpoints. Do you know what that taught us? How to negotiate, how to find common ground, how to work together despite our differences. Skills that I noticed were somewhat lacking when you were all shouting over each other while people died. Amy took over again, and her voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You want to know what the real difference is between humanity and your established civilization? You have had peace and prosperity and technological advancement for so long that you have forgotten what it means to fight for survival. You have forgotten what desperation feels like. You have forgotten that sometimes the only thing standing between life and death is the willingness to do whatever it takes. Consequences be damned. She looked directly at Admiral Vashi. You asked what we could offer this council. We offered innovation born from necessity. We offered adaptability born from hardship. We offered the perspective of a species that clawed its way up from nothing and learned every lesson the hard way. We offered courage, creativity, and the absolute refusal to accept that any problem is unsolvable. Her gaze moved to Admiral Drahorn. And you laughed at us. The silence in the chamber was oppressive, crushing. Council members stared at their consoles, at their hands, at anything except the 2 humans standing in the center of the room. The final death toll from Century Station currently stands at 41,307. Amy continued, her voice quiet now but no less powerful. That number would be over 120,000, if not for human intervention. So yes, Admiral Drahorn, we are primitives playing with dangerous technology, and those primitives just saved 80,000 lives that your advanced civilizations had already written off as acceptable losses. Brandon closed down the holographic display. We came here this morning asking for partnership, for recognition, for a seat at the table where decisions affecting the entire galaxy are made. We were denied. That is your right as the established council, but understand this. Whether you grant us membership or not, humanity will continue to grow, to explore, to innovate. We will continue to help those in need, because that is who we are. Your approval would be appreciated, but it is not required. Amy and Brandon stood together, waiting. The chamber remained silent. Judge Quintara's 4 hands were folded in front of her, and her ancient eyes held an expression that might have been shame or might have been the beginning of understanding. You have made your point, ambassadors, she said finally. And it is a point well taken. This council owes you more than gratitude. We owe you an apology, we owe you respect, and we owe you the fair consideration we failed to provide earlier. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every council member who had the courage to look back. I am calling for an immediate vote on Earth's membership petition. No delays, no procedural reviews, no waiting periods. Right here, right now, all those in favor. The vote was not unanimous, but it was close enough that the few holdouts looked foolish rather than principled. The motion passes, Judge Quintara announced. Welcome to the Galactic Council, Earth. Amy Kowalski smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won an argument but was not quite ready to forgive yet. Thank you, Your Honor, she said sweetly. We promise to try very hard not to blow ourselves up with our own technology. Though I make no guarantees, we are terribly primitive after all. Judge Quintara stood, all 4 of her hands extended in the traditional Rethkari gesture of formal apology. It was a posture that required vulnerability, exposure, and genuine contrition. She held it for a full 10 seconds, while every recording device in the chamber captured the moment for historical archives. Ambassador Kowalski, Mr. Torres, Commander Marley, and all representatives of Earth, she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of diplomatic experience and genuine regret. The Galactic Council extends its formal apology for the treatment you received earlier today. We allowed prejudice and arrogance to cloud our judgment. We failed to see the value you bring to this community, and in doing so we failed to uphold the very principles this council was founded upon. For that we are truly sorry. The apology hung in the air, sincere and uncomfortable. Amy exchanged a glance with Brandon, and some silent communication passed between them. Finally, Amy nodded. Apology accepted. Your Honor, she said. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize we have made them. Indeed, Judge Quintara agreed. She turned to face the full assembly. The vote has been cast and recorded. Earth is now a full member of the Galactic Council with all rights, privileges and responsibilities that entails. As per tradition, I now call upon the senior military advisor to formally welcome our newest members. Every eye in the chamber turned to Admiral Drahorn, who looked like he would rather have been literally anywhere else in the galaxy. He stood slowly, his tentacles moving in a pattern that suggested deep discomfort, and made his way down to the main floor, where the human delegation waited. To his credit, he did not try to make excuses or minimize his earlier behavior. He simply extended his primary appendage in the human custom of handshaking, which he had clearly researched in the last 2 hours. On behalf of the Council's Military Advisory Board, he said, each word sounding like it physically pained him, I welcome humanity to our organization. Your courage and capabilities today have earned not just membership but respect. I hope we can move forward with mutual understanding. Amy took his appendage and shook it firmly. Admiral Drahorn, I appreciate your honesty. And who knows, maybe in another century or 2 you will have evolved enough to judge species by their actions rather than their age. Until then, we will just have to be patient with you. The assembly erupted in mixed reactions. Some gasped at the audacity. Others, notably General Krufnog, barked out what might have been laughter. Admiral Drawhorn's face went through several colors before settling on something close to purple, but he managed a stiff nod. "Touché, Ambassador," he muttered. Brandon stepped forward with paperwork already prepared, because of course the humans had come ready for every possible outcome. "We accept membership under the following terms. Earth maintains full sovereignty over our territory and military forces. We participate in council decisions as equal partners, not junior members requiring supervision, and we expect the same respect and consideration afforded to every other member species." "Agreed," Judge Quintora said without hesitation. "Is there anything else?" Amy pretended to consider. "Actually, yes. When you schedule the next military coordination meeting, perhaps check with us before assuming our ships would be, what was it, escort shuttles by your standards. Turns out our escort shuttles can hold their own. Our actual warships might give you nightmares." She was bluffing, probably, but nobody in the chamber was willing to call that bluff after what they had just witnessed. The formal ceremony concluded with document signing, official recordings, and the kind of bureaucratic process that made empires function. But the real moment, the one that mattered, had already happened. The power dynamic in the galaxy had shifted, just slightly, just enough. As the human delegation prepared to leave, no longer as rejected petitioners, but as council members with all the authority that implied, Judge Quintara watched them with an expression of mixed admiration and caution. She had lived long enough to see empires rise and fall, to watch species grow from primitive origins to galactic powers. She had thought she had seen everything, that nothing could surprise her anymore. Today she had learned that assumptions, especially about humans, were dangerous things. They were young, yes. Inexperienced in some ways, certainly. But they possessed something that many older civilizations had lost. The hunger to prove themselves, the creativity born from struggle, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy had just gained a new member. Judge Quintara suspected, watching Amy Kowalski's confident stride as she exited the chamber, that the galaxy had no idea what it was in for. And somewhere in Sector 47 Delta, the UES Tenacity, relentless and defiance, maintained their protective positions around Sanctuary Station, their crews exhausted but triumphant, their captains already writing reports that would become required reading in military academies for generations to come. Humanity had arrived, and they had arrived on their own terms, in their own way,